When learning is seen as an essential skill, but never actually taught, and when the speed at which you pick up knowledge is treated as a sign of intelligence, it's no surprise that many of us feel like we're falling behind. But honestly, if you've only ever had bad teachers, how can you really know that you're a slow learner? You've never been given a real shot. And look, I'm not an expert teacher, but I've had to figure out how to get my relatively slow brain through life and through 4 years completing a master's in engineering at the University of Oxford. So if you're trying to learn faster and more effectively, especially if your brain works like mine, here's what I do to conceptualize and absorb information as efficiently as possible. Let's get straight into it. So I have a 4-step approach to learning, but the first 2 steps are nearly invisible. Most people don't even realize that they happen, and they only see the 3rd and 4th step. And so they assume I'm naturally quite fast, but that's not the case. I just do steps 1 and 2 without anybody noticing. Okay, so let's break it down. Step 1, creating a learning framework. Before I even start absorbing information, I need to prep my brain. I need to focus on emotions, limitations, implications, and connections. I carve out a mental space for what I'm about to learn, grasp the basics, and figure out how it links to everything else I already know. This makes new knowledge stick faster. The best real-world example of this is what happens in, for example, a doctor's office. A skilled doctor can talk to a patient who knows nothing about their condition, and in just a few minutes, make them understand what it is, why it matters, how to manage it, what could go wrong, and who to seek help from. And it's crazy how this happens in just a few minutes. A good doctor can explain the entire condition and everything behind the condition to a patient. Patients leave the room with much more clarity about their condition. And this is because it was taught with the idea of needing to understand it in mind. A doctor doesn't know the level of knowledge of a patient. And so everything is explained in the most simple terms. And people forget that this is the best way that we can learn. And so what I try to do when I learn is I try to replicate this and find what is the most simple way of explaining something and learning something new. So before I dive into a topic, I ask, what's the absolute simplest way to explain that? Also, I ask myself, why does this topic matter? What will I be able to do with the knowledge? And what won't I be able to do with the knowledge? Where can I go learn more about this? And also, what does an expert in this field look like? What do they know? These questions help me build a structured way for new information to fit into my current framework. Another way I reinforce this framework is by creating real-world applications for what I'm currently studying. So I place new concepts into everyday scenarios where I might actually use them. If I'm learning something new in maths, I don't just memorize the formula, but I think, okay, how can this actually be applied in the real world? Which is kind of what engineering is. And figuring this out and sort of engaging in the topics you're learning in a dynamic and active way really helps make things more memorable, makes them stick in your memory, but also makes the whole process of learning just more fun. Okay, step 2, mastering the core basics. This step gets overlooked all the time, but it makes everything else a lot easier. The core basics are the building blocks that experts take for granted, the things that allow for rapid progress. For example, when I studied music, I used to see this all the time. People who already knew how to play one instrument found it so much easier to play another. But it's weird, even though a violin is so much more different to the flute, the core concepts are the same. Sometimes they are hard to see, but they are there. Rhythm, tempo, melody, different musical structures, they're all there. They just are in a different form. The same with everything, really. A mechanic learning to fix plumbing issues will do a lot better than someone with zero knowledge of fixing things. So every time I start learning something new, I ask, what are the core principles here, and have I seen them before? So for example, in mechanics, the core principles are really just conservation of force and conservation of energy, and any mechanics problem can be solved using these. In fluids, one of the core principles that helped me think about them was that the changing direction of a fluid means that there is a change of pressure somewhere which causes this. And sometimes it takes so much time to figure out these core concepts on which everything else is built, but therefore actively trying to find them makes this process a lot quicker. And the quicker you build these core principles, the quicker you can then build up your knowledge to a higher level. Now, another thing I like to do is look at what the experts are doing. If I can't have access to them to talk to them, I like to observe them, because it's in the most expert bracket that you can see these core principles really shine through. For example, if I want to become a great video editor, I don't just look at sort of movies with flashy effects, but I look at really, really good YouTube videos and really, really good editors on YouTube. I analyze what makes their videos so professional. It's not all the effects or it's not all the animation. Sometimes it's just really precise editing. For example, what makes a great video? Sometimes it's not the image, it's the audio quality that matters most. And so implementing these core principles and really looking at what the pros do helps you focus on what really matters and what really moves the needle the most. Another crucial aspect is breaking down these core principles into layers. Understanding isn't just about grasping the big picture. It's also about just breaking things into digestible chunks. Imagine you're learning a new language. Instead of memorizing hundreds of words, focus on the fundamental grammar rules first. Build a foundation that allows you to understand how the words fit together, then expand on that knowledge gradually. To reinforce the core basics, I frequently use interleaving. This means mixing different related topics within the same study sessions. For example, if I'm learning math, I won't just stick to one type of problem and do it repeatedly. Instead, I'll switch between algebra, geometry, calculus, and this just forces your brain to recognize patterns between each topic and makes connections between different ideas, which you probably wouldn't make unless you tried this method. It is just also more fun. Okay, step 3, organizing information. Once my foundation is quite solid, everything else just speeds up. What I do now is I mentally categorize information into 4 main groups. So I have my learning framework, which are the core ideas that anything builds on. Then you have the core basics, which are the fundamental rules that apply to each idea that you need to understand before moving forward. Then you have what I'd say are the details, things like terminology, numbers, or minor facts that can be learned later, but are quite important for the topic. And then you have the low priority info, the details that don't really matter, they're just there for rigor, and they don't do much to help understanding of the subject. Okay, when I encounter new information, I quickly scan through it, slotting each part into one of these categories. Then I focus on what actually matters. To expand on this, what I do is I use active recall techniques. Instead of passively reading or watching videos, I regularly quiz myself. What did I just learn? Can I explain it in my own words? If not, I go back and refine my understanding. And this method forces my brain to engage with the material in a meaningful way, which improves long-term memory. Then I also like to make use of the Feynman technique. Could I explain this concept to a 5-year-old if I had to? And this forces you to really simplify your ideas and engage with them. And when you are able to explain it to a 5-year-old, then you've sort of filled any gaps in your core understanding that might prevent you from understanding even further in more depth. Usually if I struggle with the Feynman technique, then I know that I need to revisit a section and just read through everything once again and maybe better categorize the ideas into the 4 groups I mentioned earlier. Now I talk more about active recall and how I use Anki to do this in another video. I'll link it here so you can check it out as well. Now, another thing I like to do is use mind palaces. Now, it's not as scary or as mythical as it seems. It's just a memory technique where you associate information with specific locations in your house or a place that you know quite well. By linking new knowledge to physical spaces, you just create mental pathways that make it easier to recall information when needed. And I do this a lot with learning names, but also just learning information. I find it very simple to sort of spatially learn things and place different information in different corners of my proverbial house when I imagine it in my head. And honestly, this works great if you're a visual sort of spatial learner. Okay, step 4, learning non-linearly. This is where people usually see me learning and think, wow, he's very disciplined, very motivated. But really, it's just because I don't learn things in the order they're presented, but rather just follow how I feel in this situation. If I'm reading through a textbook and I'm forced to go through things chapter by chapter, my motivation drains quite quickly. But if I instead give my curiosity the freedom to explore the topics itself, then what I've noticed is that my mind likes to jump through chapters in an order that makes sense to it at the moment. So I might look at chapter 1 and then chapter 5 and then go to chapter 9 and then back to chapter 2. Giving my brain this freedom makes it happy with itself, and it means it will accept the terms of having to study as long as it's by its own conditions. And what I've noticed is actually by doing things my own way, how it makes sense to my head, I build a stronger framework and I grasp the core basics a lot better. And also this way, I never really run out of motivation. I only stop when I'm genuinely tired, not just when I've run out of motivation. And to strengthen this approach even further, I use spaced repetition. So instead of cramming all at once, all the material I've learned, I review it at increasing intervals, reinforcing my knowledge over time. I use Anki for it. I've made a video about how to use Anki and how I study best. So go check that out if you're interested. In any case, final thoughts. If you've made it this far, again, thanks for sticking with me. Hopefully this breakdown gives you some useful advice to sort of speed up your learning. A quick recap. We looked at Creating a learning framework before diving in is really, really important. Then we also looked at mastering the core basics. So don't skip the foundational knowledge. Everything is built on top of that. Then we learn how to organize new information into categories. So you focus on what truly matters. And then give your mind the freedom to learn non-linearly and follow your curiosity to stay engaged. Now, if you found this video useful, I'm pretty sure you'll enjoy this video over here, which talks about how to learn the really, really difficult stuff in a way that's simple and easily implemented. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.